an old mortar.
No, it's not possible.
3.
Look
She was
at her.
standing barefoot in the middle of the market when the first
remember
basket
that
hit the
key.
ground. Not on her body. Not yet. It crashed beside her with such force that the tomatoes inside split open and rolled across the red dust like drops of blood. Then the second basket followed. Then the third. And all around her, women began to laugh. Not the playful laughter of people who were surprised. Not the small laughter people give by accident. This was slow laughter. Heavy laughter. The kind that waits many days for its moment and then enjoys every second of it. And Abeni, 22 years old, with no father, no mother, and only an old blind grandmother waiting for her at home, stood in the middle of that circle and said nothing. One woman stepped forward and grabbed the scarf from Abeni's head. Another kicked over her tray of fried bean cakes. A third said, loud enough for the whole market to hear, "If poverty had a daughter, this would be her." The laughter grew louder, and just across the road, under the neem tree where cars usually stopped before entering the chief's compound, the chief's son had just stepped out of a black SUV. He saw everything. He saw the food in the dirt. He saw the scarf in another woman's hand. He saw Abeni standing there, humiliated in front of everyone, her chin trembling, but still lifted higher than anybody expected. And then he noticed something else. Around her neck, hidden half beneath her torn blouse, was an old brass key on a faded string. The moment he saw that key, the look on his face changed. Because he had seen that key before. Not in the market, not in the village, but in a place no one would ever have connected to Abeni. And in that instant, before anyone understood what was really happening, the entire future of the village had already begun to turn. But that market humiliation was not the beginning, not even close. To understand why the chief's son stepped into the dust for a girl everyone else had already decided was nothing, we have to go back. Back to the old bakery by the river. Back to a promise buried for 14 years. Back to the day Abeni's mother died with flour still on her hands and truth still trapped in her chest. Before we continue, if you love powerful African stories with deep lessons, subscribe now and stay with us until the end, because this story does not end where you think it will. The girl nobody protected. The village of Nsamanko sat between a dry riverbed and a line of low green hills that looked blue at sunset. It was the kind of place where every gate had a story, every family had secrets, and every person thought they knew everybody else's business. In that village, Chief Kwaku Mensa ruled with respect more than fear. He was not a cruel man. He was simply a man who had lived long enough to believe silence solved more problems than truth. His only son, Kofi Mensa, was 28 years old, educated in Accra, sharp in a suit, quiet in a room full of noise, and already being spoken of as the next chief long before the old man had left his chair. Women noticed him. Their mothers noticed him even more, especially Madame Sirwa. Madame Sirwa owned the biggest provision store in the market, 2 cargo vans, and half the gossip in the village. Her daughter, Ajua, had been dressed, trained, and presented for years as if she were already preparing to marry into the chief's house. Sirwa had ambition the way some people have religion. She woke up with it. She slept with it. She fed it every day. Then there was Abeni. Abeni had none of the things Sirwa valued. No father to speak for her. No mother to arrange her future. No fine clothes. No land. No brothers. No gold. She lived in a 2-room mud house at the far end of the village with her grandmother, Nana Ephia, who had lost her sight years ago, but not her memory. Every morning before sunrise, Abeni lit charcoal, ground beans, mixed batter, and fried akara at a cracked iron stove outside their house. When the first call to prayer floated from a distant town and the roosters began their competition with the dawn, she was already carrying her tray to market. She sold bean cakes, sweet bread, and coconut buns. That was how they survived. Not comfortably, not safely, but enough to keep the roof patched and medicine in the house when fever came. What people noticed first about Abeni was not her poverty. It was her manner. She walked like somebody who had not accepted the version of herself the village had written for her. She greeted elders with respect, but she did not flatter. She spoke softly, but never with fear. She wore old dresses with such cleanliness and such care that they looked almost elegant. And there is something about dignity that unsettles people who have spent years trying to teach you shame. The women saw it. Sirwa saw it most of all. Because the one thing ambition cannot tolerate is a poor girl who still looks like she belongs in the center of her own life. Why they hated her. The trouble had started 3 weeks before the market incident. Every trader in the market paid a stall fee, even the smallest sellers, even the women with only pepper and onions on a cloth, even the old men with 1 sack of cassava. Sirwa collected most of those fees through a committee she controlled. On paper, the money was for cleaning, repairs, security, and maintaining the market sheds. In reality, nobody knew exactly where much of that money went. Nobody asked either. People who ask dangerous questions in small villages often discover how expensive honesty can become. Abeni's tray was small, and she never sold from a built stall, only from a movable wooden stand near the bread sellers. For years she had paid her fee late, but always paid it somehow. Then Nana Ephia fell sick. Her chest tightened, her cough deepened. The herbs stopped helping. Abeni spent all the week's money on transport and medicine. When Sirwa's collector came for the fee, Abeni said she would pay after market day. That should have been the end of it. But Sirwa had already been watching her. Watching how Kofi's eyes sometimes lingered when he passed. Watching how people praised Abeni's bread. Watching how even hardship had failed to bend her into the shape of a beggar. So Sirwa decided the lesson had to be public. One poor girl can be tolerated. One poor girl with grace can become a threat. On the morning of the humiliation, Sirwa spread the word before sunrise. By the time the market filled with smoke, bargaining voices, and the smell of dried fish, the women who depended on her favors had already chosen their side. Abeni arrived balancing her tray on her head and smiling at a little boy who wanted the broken piece of bread she usually saved for children. She did not know the circle was waiting. They stopped her just after she set the tray down. One woman demanded the fee. Another accused her of disrespecting market authority. A third said poor people always believed rules were for others. Abeni tried to explain about her grandmother's medicine. Sirwa herself stepped forward then, wearing a bright orange wrapper and gold earrings that caught the light every time she turned her head. "If you cannot afford your place," she said, "then perhaps you should remember your place." There are some sentences that are meant not to inform, but to wound. That was one of them. Then came the baskets, then the scarf, then the laughter. And then Kofi Mensah saw the brass key. The key he should not have recognized. Kofi had returned from Accra only 2 days earlier. The city had sharpened him, but it had also tired him. Meetings, contracts, land disputes, transport permits, men who smiled with their mouths and lied with their eyes. He came home thinking he would rest in the village for 1 week before joining his father in local matters again. Instead, he stepped out of the SUV and walked straight into the kind of ugliness people call normal when it has been happening too long. At first, what held him still was shame. Not Abeni's shame, his own. Because he saw the scene and understood instantly that the women were not merely insulting her, they were performing power. And everybody watching had accepted the performance. Then his eyes fell to the brass key on the string around her neck. Old brass, long stem, clover-shaped head, one side slightly bent. His late mother had a sketchbook in the chief's house. In that sketchbook were drawings of old objects from the village she considered precious but unprotected: beads, pots, stools, locks, keys. Among them was a drawing of a bakery key. His mother had once told him, when he was a boy too young to care, "This key belongs to a woman who built bread from nothing and fed half this village before they had enough money to thank her." He had forgotten the woman's name, but he had not forgotten the key. And now it was hanging on the neck of a girl being treated like dust. Kofi crossed the road. The women quieted, not because conscience had reached them, because rank had. Sirwa turned, smile already forming. "Kofi, my son, we are only handling a small matter of discipline." Kofi did not look at her. He bent down, lifted Abeni's fallen tray, and set it upright. The market went silent. You could hear a goat pulling at a rope 2 stalls away. You could hear a spoon fall in somebody's bowl. You could hear the silence spreading faster than gossip ever did. Kofi picked one of the dusty buns from the ground, looked at it, then placed it back. "This discipline," he said quietly, "is costing someone her food." Sirwa laughed softly, trying to pull the moment back under her control. "Rules must be respected." Kofi finally looked at her. So must human beings. Then he turned to Abeni. "What is your name?" She raised her chin. "Abeni." He nodded toward the brass key. "Who gave you that key?" For the first time, something changed in her face. Not fear, not hope. Suspicion. "My grandmother," she said. "Why?" Kofi held her gaze for a second longer than was polite in public. "No reason," he said. But there was a reason. And before sunset, he intended to find it. The bakery by the river. Das evening, after the market emptied and the village softened into cooking smoke and long shadows, Kofi did something he had not done in years. He went into his late mother's room. The room had been kept closed more out of respect than grief. Her headscarves were still folded in the chest. Her framed photograph still stood on the desk. Her reading glasses still rested atop a stack of old account books, as if she might return at any moment and ask why no one had dusted properly. Kofi found the sketchbook in the bottom drawer. He opened it, page by page. Clay water pots, a broken stool with royal carvings, ceremonial bells. Then, the key. Beneath the drawing, in his mother's handwriting, were the words, "Bakery key, property of Ama Badu, to be returned to her daughter when the time is right." Kofi stared at the line until the letters blurred. Ama Badu. A name he had heard once, perhaps twice, in the background of adult conversations that children are present for, but not invited into. He kept reading. On the next page was a rough map. A bakery by the river. a storage room, a grain shed, and one more note. Land held in trust. Do not let Sirwa near it. Kofi sat down slowly. Some truths do not arrive like lightning. They arrive like water rising under a door. Silent, steady, and by the time you realize what is happening, the entire room has changed. He closed the sketchbook and went straight to his father's study. Chief Kwaku was sitting in a white singlet and wrapper, reading community reports under a standing lamp. "Did you know a woman called Ama Badu?" Kofi asked. The chief looked up once. Only once. But that was enough. Men who have practiced silence for years reveal themselves not by what they say, but by the exact moment they stop breathing. "I knew her," the chief said at last. "Who was she?" The old man set the papers aside. "She was your mother's closest friend." Kofi held up the sketchbook. "Then why does mother's handwriting say, 'This key must be returned to Ama Badu's daughter'?" The chief's face hardened, not with anger, but with caution. "Where did you see that girl?" he asked. "In the market." "And the key?" "Around her neck." The chief closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he looked older than he had that morning. "There are some matters," he said, "that should have been handled a long time ago." That was not an answer, but it was more dangerous than one. 11:30. The grandmother who remembered everything. The next morning, Kofi walked alone to Abeni's house. He left the SUV behind. Truth rarely comes clean when it hears an engine first. The house sat near the river path under a leaning mango tree. Its walls were cracked, but the yard was swept clean. A clay basin rested upside down to dry. Firewood was stacked neatly by the wall. Poverty lived there, yes, but not carelessness. Abeni was kneading dough outside when she saw him. Her hands stopped. "You came to inspect my suffering?" she asked. Kofi almost smiled. "No." "Then why are you here?" He looked at the doorway. "To speak to your grandmother." A voice came from inside. "If he has come this far, let him enter. Pride does not cook soup." Nana Ephia sat on a low mat near the window, wrapped in blue cloth, her blind eyes turned toward the doorway with unsettling accuracy. Kofi greeted her. She answered with the calm authority of someone who had outlived both pity and fear. "I know your voice," she said. "You sound like your mother. That is unfortunate for you." She asked too many honest questions. Kofi sat. He placed the sketchbook on the floor between them and said the name softly. "Ama Badu." Nana Ephia's hands froze over the beads she had been rolling between her fingers. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the old woman let out a breath that sounded like something leaving her body after years of waiting. "So the dead have finally become impatient," she said. Abeni turned sharply. "Grandmother?" Nana Ephia faced the sound of her voice. "The time I prayed would not come, has come." She reached toward Abeni. Abeni took her hand. Then the old woman began. Ama Badu, she said, was Abeni's mother. Not simply a bread seller, not simply a poor widow. She was once the owner of the first real bakery in Nsamanko, built with her own savings and the support of Kofi's mother, Essie Mensah. Together, the two women planned something bigger than bread. They wanted to create a women's cooperative, a place where widows, abandoned wives, and poor girls could learn baking, save money, and trade without begging powerful people for permission. The land by the river was placed in trust. The official papers existed. The chief's wife kept copies. Amma kept the key. And Sirwa hated the idea from the beginning, because a woman who controls her own bread does not kneel easily. Everything was stolen. Years earlier, when Abeni was 8, a fire broke out in the bakery after midnight. That was the story everyone knew. What they did not know was that the bakery had not merely burned, it had been looted first. The account book vanished. The trust documents disappeared. The savings box from the cooperative was emptied. Amma Badu tried to fight for what was left, but grief and debt arrived together. Kofi's mother fell ill that same year and died months later. Without Essie Mensah's protection, Amma stood alone. The people who had smiled when she gave them bread stepped back when trouble came.
Suppliers stopped offering credit. Helpers disappeared. Sirwa, already rising in power, offered small loans with large conditions. Amma refused her. That refusal cost her everything. Within a year, Amma was sick. Within 2, she was dead. Abeni had remembered almost nothing clearly, only the smell of flour, the sound of women laughing in a warm room, and her mother tying a brass key around her neck one rainy evening and saying, "Even if I cannot explain it now, keep this. One day it will open more than a door." Nana Ephia wiped her eyes. "After Amma died," she said, "I hid the child and the key. I thought if people forgot what belonged to her mother, the girl might at least stay alive." Kofi leaned forward. "Who has the documents now?" The old woman turned her face toward him. "If the devil keeps trophies," she said, "then look in Sirwa's house." Abeni stared as if the earth beneath her had shifted. "My mother owned the bakery?" she whispered. "She owned more than that," Nana Ephia said. "She owned a future people were afraid to let poor women touch." There are moments when a life splits into before and after. For Abeni, this was one. Before that morning, she had been poor. After that morning, she was still poor, but poverty had lost its innocence. It was no longer misfortune alone, it was theft with witnesses. Kofi left the house with the sketchbook under his arm and fire in his chest. He could have gone to his father immediately. He could have demanded the truth in the safety of family walls. But he knew something about family walls. They soften public crimes into private regrets. They turn theft into misunderstanding. They turn cowardice into age. And they often bury women twice, first in life, then in explanation. So he went first where truth was less comfortable, to the old records room behind the chief's court. Dust lay thick on the shelves. Lizards scattered when he opened ledgers no one had touched in years. Payment books, land notes, market permits, cooperative registrations. Half the village's forgotten history sleeping beneath cobwebs and neglect. For 4 hours he searched. At noon, he found the first piece. A registration note for the River Women's Bread Cooperative, co-founded by Essie Mensah and Amma Badu. At the bottom was a reference number for trust land. The trust file itself was missing. That absence was louder than any evidence. Then came the second piece, a list of temporary market management transfers signed 12 years earlier after the bakery fire. One name appeared again and again, Madame Sirwa Asiedu. Temporary. What a powerful word. Temporary injustice is how permanent theft usually begins. Kofi copied what he found. Then he made one more stop. The bank in the next town. He knew the manager. Men like Kofi always know managers.
By evening, he had what he needed. Transfer records from Sirwa's business account to 3 committee members over many years. Small amounts, regular, quiet. Not enough to look like greed at first glance. More than enough to smell like control. When he returned home, his father was waiting. Chief Kwaku sat on the veranda in silence until Kofi placed the copied records on the table between them. The old man read without touching his tea. "Did you know?" Kofi asked. The chief took too long to answer. That was answer enough. "I knew the matter was never settled," he said. "That is not what I asked." Chief Kwaku looked out toward the darkening compound. "There are times when a leader chooses peace because the truth will tear too much apart." Kofi's voice was low. "And while you chose peace, a child carried her mother's key like a charm and sold bread in the dust." His father said nothing. Silence again. The old family language. But silence had already done enough. This time he did not come with questions only. He came with copies. She read slowly, not because she was uneducated, because some words are so heavy they refuse to move quickly through the eyes. Her mother's name, the cooperative, the land, the market committee, the bank transfers. When she finished, she placed the papers on the bench and stared at the river path beyond the yard. Kofi expected tears. What came instead was anger so calm it frightened him. "What do rich people always want from truth?" she asked. He frowned. "What do you mean?" "They want to feel sad first," she said. "Then noble, then generous. Then they offer to help." Kofi did not defend himself. Abeni continued. "I do not want pity. I do not want anyone saying they can save me. I want the truth said where the lie lived. I want it said in the market." Kofi looked at her for a long moment. Most people, when pain finally finds language, ask for comfort. Abeni asked for witnesses. That was when his respect became something deeper. "You will have it," he said. She shook her head. "No, we will have it." That afternoon, for the first time in years, Abeni did not carry food to market. Instead, she washed her one cream-colored dress and ironed it with hot charcoal. She cleaned her mother's brass key until it caught light. She braided her hair with quiet care and sat beside Nana Ephia, while the old woman told her everything she could remember about the bakery, the women who used to knead dough together, the songs they sang while bread rose under cloth, the dream her mother had of poor girls one day owning shops instead of serving inside them. Abeni listened without blinking. Outside, the village moved as always. Children chased tires, women pounded fufu, motorbikes coughed up dust, and under that ordinary noise, something extraordinary was preparing itself. Because stolen truth grows restless when someone finally learns its real name. 22 Sirwa realized the ground was moving. People like Sirwa do not sense danger through conscience, they sense it through pattern. When a committee member avoided her eyes that morning, she noticed. When Kofi passed her store without greeting, she noticed. When one of the old market women abruptly stopped talking as she approached, she noticed. By afternoon, fear had begun to scratch at the walls of her confidence. She went into her back office, unlocked the green metal cabinet, and pulled out an old file wrapped in cloth. Inside were copies she had never destroyed. Some people keep evidence because they are cautious. Others keep it because power feels sweeter when you can touch what you took. Land notes, committee signatures, an unsigned settlement draft, and one folded letter from Esi Mensa to Ama Badu, mentioning the trust arrangement and the key. Sirwa had kept them all. She told herself for years it was wisdom. In truth, it was vanity. She wanted history near enough to remember she had beaten it. That evening she sent for Ajua. Her daughter arrived in perfume and polished sandals, beautiful and tired in the way of women who have spent too long being used as ambition in human form. "Stay close to Kofi tomorrow," Sirwa said. Ajua's eyes narrowed. "What happened?" "Nothing has happened." "That means something has." Sirwa turned sharply. "I said stay close." Ajua was quiet for a moment, then asked the question her mother hated most. "Did you do something to that bread girl?" Sirwa's silence answered. Ajua looked away slowly, like someone seeing the shape of her mother's heart and not liking it. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, but no rain came. When the chief approves such a gathering, everyone comes. Not because they are free, because they want to know which truth is about to become official. By midday, the market was full before a single tomato had been sold. The chief's chair was brought out. Elders arranged stools.
Children were ordered to the back, and then ignored that order completely. Women whispered. Men guessed. Sirwa arrived in expensive cloth and a face made of stone. Ajua walked beside her, not touching her. Abeni came on foot with Nana Ephia and Kofi. She wore the cream dress. Simple. Clean. Her mother's brass key lay at the center of her chest for everyone to see. People stared. Some recognized it. Most only recognized that something in her had changed. She was no longer standing as someone waiting to be judged. She was standing as someone who had already survived judgment and had come now for the record. Chief Kweku opened the meeting with customary greetings. Then he paused. A long pause. The kind that tells a whole village the moment has become larger than the speaker. Finally, he said, "We are gathered because a wrong that should have been corrected years ago has ripened into shame." The market shifted like wind through dry leaves. Chief Kweku motioned to Kofi. Kofi stepped forward with the papers. And for the first time in the history of Nasamanko's market, a poor girl's life was about to be read aloud from documents instead of rumor. He named Ama Badu. He named Essie Mensa. He named the Riverwomen's Bread Cooperative. He named the Land Trust. He named the bakery. He named the fire, the missing file, the temporary market transfer, and the years of quiet payments. Some of the older women began to murmur before he finished. Memory had returned to them. Not enough to make them brave years ago, enough to make them uncomfortable now. Then Kofi lifted his mother's sketchbook and read the line beneath the drawing. Abeni did not move. Only her fingers tightened around Nana Ephia's hand. Chief Kweku then did something even more important than allowing the truth. He joined it. He stood and said, in full hearing of the village, "My late wife protected this matter in writing. I failed to protect it in action. For that failure, I take responsibility." One expected that. Power rarely apologizes without negotiation, but the apology was not the climax. Kofi turned towards Sirwa. "Madam Sirwa," he said, "do you deny receiving control of market collections through a temporary arrangement after the bakery fire?" Sirwa's lips parted. She looked first at the chief, then the elders, then the crowd. People like her often survive because they answer quickly. That day, quickness abandoned her. "I managed what others abandoned," she said finally. "That is not a denial," Kofi replied. A village elder asked, "Where are the original trust documents?"
Sirwa said nothing.
Another elder asked,
Why were committee members paid from your private account? Still nothing. Then Abeni stepped forward, and when she spoke, she did not shout. That made it worse. I sold bread on this same ground while you collected money from women on land my mother built to protect them, she said. You watched me struggle and called it order. The market was so quiet, even the birds seemed to wait. I can forgive poverty, Abeni continued. I cannot forgive being made small on purpose. Somewhere in the crowd, an old woman began to cry. They split in many directions at once. A committee member stood up and confessed he had taken monthly payments. Another admitted the market books were altered. A third said he had seen the file in Sirwa's office years ago, but feared losing his stall if he spoke. Every confession made the next one easier. That is the strange thing about courage. It is contagious once someone pays the first price. Sirwa realized then that the ground beneath her was gone. She reached for dignity. What came out was bitterness. Yes, she said. I kept control. Yes, I protected my position. Yes, I thought giving that girl power would create confusion. That girl has a name, Ajua said suddenly. Every head turned. It was the first time she had opposed her mother publicly. Ajua stepped away from Sirwa and stood facing the crowd. My mother taught me to desire a life I never even chose, she said. If she buried this woman's inheritance to build mine, then I reject it. The sound in the market then was not one sound, but many. Gasps, whispers, shock, satisfaction. The grinding movement of a community rearranging its moral furniture in real time. Chief Kwaku raised his hand for silence. In light of the evidence, he said, Madam Sirwa is removed from all market authority effective immediately. A full review of all collections for the past 14 years will begin. The River Land Trust shall be restored to the rightful line of Ama Badu through her daughter, Abeni. Abeni lowered her head. Not in submission, in impact. Some victories do not feel like joy when they first arrive. They feel like the body struggling to hold what it has wanted too long. Then the chief turned to her again and said words the market would repeat for years. What was stolen from your mother will not be buried with you. What Abeni did with her victory. Many people think the best revenge is to rise higher than those who mocked you. Sometimes it is. But sometimes the greater thing is to refuse to become them. In the weeks that followed, the village expected Abeni to leave the market behind. She did not. She returned on the next market day with a new table, a fresh cloth, and the same food, only better. But this time, she was not standing there as a tolerated poor seller. She was standing as legal heir to the river property and acting head of the restored cooperative. Women came to buy bread and stayed to ask questions. Widows came quietly first, then openly. Young girls came after school to help knead and watch. Within 2 months, the old bakery walls were being rebuilt, not as a private business alone, as a training center, a place where girls who had been laughed at could learn something that earned money in daylight and respect after sunset. Abeni named it Ama House, after her mother. Kofi visited often, at first with papers, builders, legal forms, and practical advice, then with no excuse at all. He watched her measure flour with the same seriousness elders used for land matters. He watched her pay workers on time. He watched her speak to shy girls with the gentleness of somebody who remembered exactly what it felt like to stand unprotected in public. There are people you admire, and there are people whose presence makes you ashamed of the easier version of yourself. Abeni had become the second kind. The love nobody could manufacture. Sirwa had spent years trying to engineer a marriage between Adjua and Kofi. But love refuses architecture when the foundation is ambition. Kofi had never loved Adjua. He did not dislike her. He simply never saw in her what he needed. With Abeni, it was different from the beginning. Not because she was helpless, because she was not. Not because he saved her, because she refused to be saved in the ordinary way. She demanded truth, not rescue. And truth is the one thing a serious man can either run from or fall in love with. One evening, after workers had left the bakery and the smell of fresh bread still lingered in the cooling air, Kofi walked Abeni to the river path. The hills were purple. Bats crossed the sky in quick, dark strokes. Somewhere behind them, village drums were beginning for a naming ceremony. Kofi stopped beneath the old mango tree near her house. "When I first saw you in the market," he said, "I thought I was witnessing cruelty." Abeni looked at him. "And now?" "Now, I think I was witnessing a village trying and failing to decide your worth." She almost smiled. "That is a very long sentence for a simple thought." He laughed softly. Then he became serious again. "I do not want to stand beside you because I pity what happened," he said. "I want to stand beside you because of who you were before the truth came out, and who you remained after it."
Abeni was quiet for a long time. Then she reached up and touched the brass key at her throat. "For years," she said, "I thought this key meant one day I would open a room. I did not know it would open a life." Kofi stepped closer. "Will you let me walk inside that life with you?" This time, she did smile. Small. Real. Dangerous to any man hoping to remain unchanged. "Yes," she said. Not in secret, not in haste, and not as a prize for suffering. That mattered. Abeni was not rewarded with love because she had been poor. She was loved because she had proven herself larger than the poverty designed around her. The wedding took place near the rebuilt bakery, not inside the chief's compound. That mattered too. The whole village came. Old women who once laughed now carried trays. Young girls from Amma house scattered flower petals. Nana Ephia, dressed in white and gold, sat in the front row with tears on her face and joy in both hands. Adjua attended as well. Not bitter, not broken, free. She had moved to Kumasi to study business accounting and wrote to Abeni sometimes with ideas for cooperative savings systems. Strange how truth, once finally spoken, can rescue more than one life. As for Sirwa, power left her slowly, which was fitting. She kept her store, but never again her authority over the market. She lived long enough to watch women she once controlled pay no respect to fear. That was punishment enough. When Abeni walked toward Kofi in a gown of ivory lace mixed with kente, the brass key worked into the design near her waist. The people of Nsamanko did not see a poor girl who had become lucky. They saw a story they had nearly helped bury. Chief Kweku stood before the crowd and said, "Let this village remember, when you reduce a person for convenience, you do not change their value. You only expose your own." The women from Amma house sang. The drums answered.
children danced in the dust. And somewhere beyond the music, beyond the market, beyond the old shame that once seemed permanent, the memory of Ama Badu finally rested. Because the daughter who had watched her mother disappear into silence had done what many never managed to do. She had taken inherited pain and turned it into bread. She had taken public humiliation and turned it into witness. She had taken a brass key on a string and used it to unlock dignity not only for herself, but for every girl who would come after her. If this story touched you, subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. And remember this: what people hide from you can delay your future. It cannot cancel it. What was stolen can be restored.
What was mocked can become honored. And what was meant to keep you small may one day become the very proof that you were always meant to rise.